Welcome everyone. My name is Hallie Caldwell and I'm with Quad Education. We're so glad that you could join us for our webinar today on how to become a competitive BSMD applicant. We have two great panelists for you who are two of our superstar admissions counselors who are experts in the BSMD process, and we're so thrilled to have them here. Just want to give you a quick overview on what Quad Education is. We're a company that helps students apply to college. We help students and families build candidacy, help students study for SATs, ACTs, choose their college lists, write essays, put together their application, and overall just help students become stronger applicants and get into their dream schools. All right, so we have a lot to talk about today. We'll introduce our panelists, talk about what a BSMD program is, what it entails, the pros and cons of choosing to go the BSMD routes, what the application process looks like, the timeline for applying, how to stand out, some myths that people hear about BSMD programs, and then we'll open up the floor for some Q&A questions. So if you have any, feel free to pop them in the Q&A chat, and at the end, we will get to all of those questions. All right, so we have Jennifer White and Rachel Woods here with us today. Rachel, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks, Hallie. Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel Woods. I'm from New York. I went to college. I did my undergrad at Cornell University, and then I took a couple years off and worked for a few years, attended law school, worked for a couple more years. And during all of that time, I was helping students with the application process, helping them navigate. I've helped with a ton of students going on the medical route as well as the law route, and then just general routes. So I ultimately decided to leave law practice and pursue consulting full time. So I'm really excited to be speaking to you all tonight.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer White, and I have a background in higher education where I've been working for about 20 years directing study abroad programs at universities across the US. I've helped students get into Oxford and other top universities in the UK, find their best fit programs. And that was really building on my own background, doing my master's degree in Japan, where I got a scholarship from the Japanese Ministry of Education to pursue my graduate work there, which built on my undergraduate career at Harvard University, where I was awarded a degree in English and East Asian Studies. I've been working with high school students now for a number of years, helping students get access into highly selective schools, find their best fit programs, and really chart their whole life course. And I'm very excited to be with you this evening.
Thanks so much, Jennifer. All right, we'll dive right in. So we'll start with talking about what is a BSMD program. Rachel, can you tell us a little bit about BSMD programs?
Absolutely. So basically, a BSMD program is a program where you essentially kind of combine the bachelor process and the MD process into one. So it allows you to complete these programs to back without having to take time off in between, although some students do choose to take some time off. In general, you attend the medical school that is affiliated with the undergrad institution. There are cases where there might be a different school that's affiliated with the program, but in general, you will be with in that same school. The program length can vary. So usually you'll see them, there's about 7 or 8 years. Sometimes they'll be 6, but those are more rare. There are only a couple that are actually 6. Most are 7 to 8. For the 7-year programs, it's generally 3 years of undergrad and then 4 years of medical school. They also have BSDO programs in addition to BSMD programs. So in general, they're a little less competitive. There are fewer of those kinds of programs, but you definitely need to make sure that you want to go the DO route versus the MD route. They're very similar. You're taking many of the same courses, but with the DO schools, there are some different types of courses that you're going to be taking that might have a more holistic approach. So that's definitely something that you want to do some more research on before you make that final decision. And that's pretty much just a general overview of what the BSMD program is.
Fantastic. Let's talk about some of the pros of participating in a BSMD program.
Sure. There are a lot of pros to this approach. One of the huge ones is that you're applying basically just one time for both your undergraduate and your graduate programs in medical school. Some undergraduate programs are going to allow you flexibility to be creative with your undergraduate degree program. But you won't have that stress in some cases of needing to worry about the MCAT and the AMCAS applications. So it really frees up some time for you to develop your own unique selves as undergraduates while you're working towards your eventual goal. Some schools do require the MCAT, so it's not a guarantee, and you need to be thinking about that when you're choosing a BSMD program. You also can finish sooner than 8 years or 7 to 8 years. Some students will take courses in the summertime and then move ahead that way and accelerate the pace of an already accelerated program. And many of these programs are quite small. They're really niche programs. If you think about it, you need to know at a quite young age that you're committed to this professional trajectory. And so you're going to be around like-minded peers who share those same interests with you, and faculty mentors who are really very heavily invested in helping you succeed. And while it's generally expected that you're going to go on and complete the program at the university that you started at, there are GPA requirements that you're going to have to maintain. And there may be other kind of expectations along the way for you to complete the undergraduate program and move smoothly into the graduate program. So it's really important to read all of those details as you're making your selections on the front end.
Great. Rachel, do you have anything to add to the pros before we move on to the cons?
No, I think Jennifer pretty much covered it, but I can definitely jump into some cons. Well, so while there are a lot of pros to these types of programs, there are also some things to consider that, maybe might shed some other light. So, it can definitely be challenging to make this kind of decision at such a young age, at 17 or 18 years old. Applying to, an 8-year program, that's like a big chunk of your time. It's a big time commitment, money commitment, experience. And oftentimes it's hard to know if that's what you definitely want to do when you're 17 or 18 years old. So, it's hard to make such a big commitment because it is a long track. Not only are you looking at those 8 years of schooling, but then you also have to think about residency and all of the requirements beyond everything that it takes to become a doctor. Another con is that in general, you're kind of locked into whichever program you apply to. So you don't generally have the option to apply to any other medical school. So you are essentially at 17 or 18 years old applying to medical school and saying that if I get into this program, then I will continue into that medical school. You also don't have as many options. There aren't as many BSMD or BSDO programs in the country as there are regular pre-med programs. So you don't have as many options as your peers. They're also very competitive. As Jennifer mentioned, these are really small programs. Some may have 20 spots, but oftentimes many of the programs that you'll see will only have 5 spots. So it's extremely competitive. There's a very low acceptance rate, so they're really going to scrutinize your applications and look very closely at all of the small details. And while it can be great to accelerate your timeline in school, that also does mean that you will probably have a heavier course load. If you have to finish undergrad in 3 years, that might require taking summer classes or taking, maxing out the number of credits you take each semester. So you do also need to think about the heavier workload that comes along with an accelerated program. And even if you're not in the accelerated program, even if you're in an 8-year program, it's still a heavy workload. And as Jennifer mentioned, you will generally have to there are GPA requirements and other requirements, including MCAT requirements oftentimes. So while, some schools don't require the MCAT, others do, and you still have to maintain certain grades in order to continue with that program. So those are definitely some things you want to consider when you are making this decision, because it is a big lifelong decision.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. Thank you. Jennifer, anything else to jump in there with, or?
No, I think Rachel covered it really, really thoroughly.
Great. Let's move on to, is a BSMD right for me?
Now, when we're thinking about, is something right for us, there's two sides of that equation, right? You're getting to know the institution and the program that's on offer, and you also have to really know yourself. And in whatever way you know works for you, now is the time to be really digging in and reflecting on your career aspirations and your goals and why. It's the really big question that many of these applications contain. And you need to be able to articulate something that sounds compelling and also sounds really authentic. It sounds like who you are. I encourage you to spend a lot of time shadowing physicians in your area, reaching out and networking and asking people if they would spare half an hour over coffee at a free time that they might have to be able to answer some questions you have about what's it really like. The shadowing opportunities really give you an understanding of what the day-to-day is about. What are the challenges? What is going to be the hardest part of it for you? And to have a really clear understanding of how you're going to tackle those challenges and those obstacles before you even get started on the pathway, since it is such a restrictive and intensive and very heavy commitment on your part. You really need to be thinking about doing research as well. Programs are looking, if you haven't already had research experience, for you to develop that and really be able to demonstrate that you have research acumen. You've got the chops to be able to do this, because you're basically making a case as a graduating high school student that you're going to be able to demonstrate the competency to succeed in medical school. And that's a stretch for many students. And it's important that you show, not just tell, the admissions committees that you have the qualifications, the skills, the stamina, and the strength to be able to get this done and to see it through. They don't want to be admitting students into these programs who are going to bow out midway through. There, as Rachel mentioned, there are very few spaces, and they want to make sure that you're going to be able to see the program through to completion. So you want to be looking at your stats, again, bearing in mind how competitive these programs are. The scores just are very important. And to try on these different institutions for size. You need to do virtual visits. If it's possible for you to do in-person visits, if it's possible for you to go while students are there and get a sense of what the campus feels like, because you're going to be spending the next 7 to 8 years of your life there. So those are all really important pieces of the puzzle that you need to be assembling right now.
Yeah, and I'll just add on to one more thing. So I've worked with many students who, once they learn about BSMD programs, they kind of get it in their head that that is the only way forward. That's the only way to get to medical school. But I can assure you that that is not the case. Obviously these are very competitive programs and only a select number of students actually go through them. In general, students go the pre-med route. They are pre-med and undergrad. And then there's even some students who don't do that. They have other careers and then they go back and get post-baccalaureate degrees and then go to medical school. So, it's definitely something to consider because as we've mentioned, there are a lot of pros to these programs, but it's certainly not the only way to become a doctor. So it's also important to take that into consideration and recognize that it's not the end all be all. And I guess on that note, I will just jump into the next slide. So just talking about the application process in general. So in general, you use the Common App or the Coalition app. Some schools may require you to submit application materials through another portal. So it's important to, always read everything on the Common App and then also go to the school's websites to see if they have any additional requirements. But in general, it's pretty standard. You need, your transcripts, your test scores, letters of recommendation, activities list, personal statement, and all of those things that I just mentioned are things that are part of, your general applications either way. And then supplemental essays. So one of the things about the BSMD programs is that since they are basically admitting you to medical school, they will require a bit more of you upfront. So in general, you will have to write supplemental essays. Now, sometimes you'll have to write them as part of the initial application. Other times you will complete a general application and then the school might follow up with additional questions and give you about a month or so to complete those additional questions. So it really varies depending upon the school, but when you are applying to these programs, it's, you should definitely expect to have at least one or several supplemental essays per school. Again, these programs do need to differentiate the students in some way. And the medical schools will be looking at the applications as well. So again, you'll need to write the BSMD specific essays to accompany your application. And then oftentimes, pretty much always, there will also be interviews that accompany the application. So what the school, they do not interview every applicant. If they have, say, 100 applicants, they may choose 20 to interview and then 5 are accepted. So, you'll hear throughout the process whether you're moving on to the next stage, and we'll talk a little bit more about the interview process in further detail later.
Great. Let's move on to talking a little bit more about essays. Jennifer, do you want to take this one?
Yep, sure. So some of the BSMD specific essay prompts will fall under these kind of themes. Why medicine, or why do you want to be a doctor? Why did you choose to apply to this program? How will you contribute to the program or the medical profession as a whole? And then talking about some of your extracurriculars that are very meaningful to you. So what they're looking for in each of these is to really get to know you. Sometimes it's really challenging for students to dig deep and to be vulnerable and transparent with people let alone people that you've never met. And yet it's really an important piece of the application. Because as Rachel mentioned, it's so competitive to get from point A even to the interview process. And part of what gets you there is being genuine, being your authentic self, and really showing that you understand what you're getting into and that you've done really thorough research on the institution that you're applying to. Half of the battle with the supplemental essays is knowing your institution, knowing your audience, who are you writing for? And it's important to get really expert level advice and coaching in crafting those essays, because a generic essay is just not going to cut it here. When you're thinking about the why this program, you're not talking about, I've always wanted to go to this, amazing BSMD program called PLEME at Brown because Brown's an amazing school. No. You're talking about, how does this program compare to others? What does it offer that others don't? What is your draw and your compelling reason for selecting this one? And you're doing that for each one. You want to highlight distinguishing features of the programs, and you're going to get to be an expert on each of these schools and each of the programs. There's alumni spotlights, there's informational sessions, there's all kinds of ways that you can find out this information, but you really have to take responsibility for finding it out yourself. Your counselor is not going to provide it to you, your advisors, your teachers aren't going to. You're going to be the one there doing the research online, trying to find others who have attended these programs that you can talk to, again, through that all-important skill of networking, and really, let your passions and your interests really come through at the same time that you're showing that you've done the research on your school. Schools are looking to know why they should pick you. So you need to be able to articulate what you're going to bring into the table. What are the unique aspects of your background that are going to help diversify their student body, enrich their campus community? It's a time that you have to get really good at bragging about yourself. And that might not come naturally to you, but it's kind of an essential skill in this whole process. Again, you want to think forward to the skills and characteristics that you're going to need to demonstrate in your career as a physician. You want to be able to show the compassion, empathy, curiosity, and excitement about making discoveries that you have already had and that you hope to have more of. And then when you're working on the extracurricular essay, you're really focusing on an extracurricular where you've made meaningful contributions. You may have started an organization, you may have started a nonprofit, you may have done community outreach for a cause you believe in, and then really taken on a leadership role within that organization. And those are all really important things to highlight for admissions committees.
Fantastic. That was a lot of great information. We'll talk a little bit about what the timeline looks like for submitting these applications.
So the timeline, it's pretty similar to just the general college timeline, although you might have you definitely will have some earlier application deadlines. So applications open in August. They usually remain open through October. They close, in the fall time, November to January. Oftentimes they're going to close on the earlier side. Things are usually due by October 15th, November 1st. For those schools that have you submit essays after you've submitted your initial application, they might leave it open a little bit longer. But usually by the new year is when you're going to be pretty much complete with the application process. And then the interview process will generally take place in the first part of the year, so December to March. And then the decisions will come out March, April. So it pretty much follows, the general application timeline for other colleges. But I would say the first thing you want to do when you do decide to apply to these programs is check deadlines and just make sure that you are on track, make a schedule for yourself, make a timeline for yourself, and just know when every deadline is.
Great. All right, we're going to dive into a little bit more about positioning yourself as the best BSMD candidate and how to set yourself up for success there.
Yeah, sure. And here again, we're focusing on the statistics because of the very intense competition. You have to think that acceptance rates at some of these programs are 1%, 2%, and getting the strong GPA and your highest test scores possible are not a guarantee of admission, but they're a prerequisite for being considered for admission. You need to do the absolute best that you can. So you're wanting to look at how your GPA is comparing to students who have been admitted to the school, and how do your SAT and ACT scores compare to admitted students. You can look at profile data for the class, and that can help you analyze how you're doing and where you need to maybe improve or enhance some skills. It really does come down to looking at those they're considered basics, although they're incredibly high achievements that you should be really proud of. That's just the baseline. It's really just the beginning. And the other aspects of your application that I was narrating before, where you're creating a compelling narrative, you're amassing research experience, you're getting as much shadowing and volunteering experience as possible, and you can start doing that quite young. You're really building all of that on top of this foundation. Look at the stats as your building blocks and your foundation. They're necessary, but not sufficient for success in this endeavor.
So, and I'll just add to that a little bit. So some schools will have cutoffs, SAT, ACT cutoffs, which is important to look at. Others don't. They'll just say, here, these are the general ranges of scores for students who are admitted to the program. If your score is not exactly within that range, that certainly doesn't mean you shouldn't apply. If this is something that you're passionate about, you can absolutely apply, but you should go into it knowing that, there's a good chance that it might not work out. But at the same time, it is a holistic review process. So as Jennifer mentioned, you want to tell a compelling story, and they are looking at more than just scores. Scores are very important, but they will look at your essays, they'll look at your extracurriculars, they'll look at the circumstances of your life and anything else that you've included in your application so that they can make a holistic decision on your application. Again, they do have some score cutoffs for certain schools. So you always want to be mindful of that. But, just because you might be slightly below doesn't mean it's not worth it to apply. But again, that's a personal decision and you have to make that decision for yourself and, based on each of the different programs. And then I guess I'll just move on to extracurriculars. So, Jennifer touched on this a little bit, but it's really great. And you can start really young with the extracurriculars. So, doing research in a medical field, you can certainly get involved in high school. If you know any physicians or any teachers who are teaching any sort of science classes, you can certainly get involved in some research. This is a great way to show that you're passionate about the subject. It's a great way to get involved at a young age. You can even potentially get a publication, which looks really good on a resume in the future. Shadowing is another great way to get involved. If you haven't actually seen a physician in action, then, how do you know you really want to do it? So if you have family friends or family members who are doctors, it's great to see if you can, get in and shadow them for the day, see them operating in the OR or, even just following them around for a couple of weeks, just to kind of see what the day-to-day life is like. It's also great to do volunteering. A lot of hospitals love free labor. So it's a great way to, get into hospitals and clinics and just kind of see how the day-to-day life is. Obviously you're not going to be performing surgery and nobody expects that, but you can still kind of get a feel for what doctors do on a daily basis. You can meet medical students, you can meet other volunteers, people who might be going through the process. So it's a great way to connect and network and just really, learn more about the process and whether or not it's the right fit for you, because you may end up working in a hospital and say, I could never see myself doing this. And it's important to know that as well. So it's really helpful to get all of these different kinds of experiences. And then admissions committees want to know that you're involved in a bunch of different things and that you've tested your motivation for medicine and that you really know what you're getting yourselves into.
Fantastic. Thank you. One thing I want us to touch on briefly before we move on is for standardized tests, there are a lot of schools that are going test blind or test optional. Do you, Jennifer or Rachel, do either of you have a strategy for when to or not to submit scores in either of those cases?
Yeah, I think that in general, you have to look at your application and be realistic. Look at your scores. Evaluate your application as a whole, see if, if other than the score, you might be a really good fit. And if the score is the only thing that's holding you back, then maybe that might be a good time to not submit it. But I think you need to do it. It's a personal decision and it needs to be done on a case-by-case basis. So even if that might be the case for one school, that's not necessarily the case for other schools. So I think you really need to think hard about, what the admissions committee is going to see when they're looking at your application as a whole.
Fantastic. All right, let's move on to talk a little bit more about writing essays. We talked about essay topics a little bit earlier, and this is important for all college applications. So we won't dive too far into this, but just give a little bit of an overview of things to be thinking about.
I love that I got this slide because essay writing and editing with my students is one of my favorite parts of this work. Your essays might feel intimidating and you might dread this whole aspect of your application, and that's okay because there are others around that can support you and help draw out your ideas. So if you're having trouble getting started, even thinking about the direction that you want to go in, one of the things I recommend is to just sit and talk with a friend. Have them ask you the questions and talk it out. Sometimes the process of writing feels more intimidating than it needs to feel. It's just a synopsis of what you would communicate in the spoken language, but in written form. So if you think of it that way, sometimes when my students get writer's block, I tell them to take out their phone, put on record, and just start talking. And they're going to get over whatever is holding them back and whatever they're stuck on. So you want to be making sure to do what we call show, not tell, by using vivid imagery. It doesn't do any good to say, I was really scared about this first time that I walked into a hospital. You want to narrate it so that your reader is coming along step by step. The doors opened, I peered around the corner, dot, 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 dot. And you're drawing your reader along with you through really active verb choices, really exile forms of the verb to be, is, was, were, don't really have much place in this kind of writing. You're wanting to be very animated and really connect and use your best SAT vocabulary in some of your essays to show your intellectual skills. You want to reflect on your experiences. It is not just enough to narrate what you did. Programs are looking to learn about how those experiences shaped you. How did they change you? How did they challenge you? How did you overcome that kind of adversity? So that, again, you're demonstrating and showing that you have the strength and resilience of character to succeed, not only in the program, but as a physician. And you're doing that at the age of a high school senior. So you really need to dig deep and find those experiences that show your maturity and the depth of your character and how you're going to really be able to excel as a physician. And then it's the basics of your writing. You want to be with someone who can not just run a grammar check program and a spell check program on you, which is, that's an essential first step, but looking at your sentence structure and is it interesting? Does it vary? Do you fall into the same patterns all the time of writing sentences in the same way? Some students will start with an adverb, ly, comma, da, 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 da. And you do 6 of those in an essay and your reader's kind of looking for the coffee cup to wake up. So you want to make sure that you're varying up your syntax. You can have English teachers help you, friends, your college advisors. We're all happy to hop in there and help you get your best work across. It still needs to stay in your own voice and remain authentic to you. But really, my encouragement is to not be intimidated by the process. Once you get started, it's going to be easier than you might think.
Fantastic. Rachel, anything else to add there?
No, I think Jennifer covered everything
Great.
very thoroughly.
All right, let's talk a little bit about interviews, which are pretty unique to BSMD programs.
Yes, they are. So generally for college, you're not going to have interviews for undergrad institutions. For medical schools, you will. So they're pretty much modeled after traditional medical school interviews. So you may be speaking to doctors, faculty members, admissions committee staff members, any number of people. You might be speaking to all of them in the same day. So you'll definitely want to be prepared for multiple interviews. You'll generally know who you're speaking to ahead of time. So it's really helpful to look them up, learn a little bit about them, come up with a couple of questions to ask them, specific to the type of medicine that they're involved in or any research they're involved in. The purpose of this is to give the school insight into you, your opinions, your thought process, your personality, and, why you really want them to know why you want to be a doctor and why you'd be a good fit and why they should take the chance and accept you out of, however many hundreds of students might be applying for only 5 spots. So this is really your opportunity to, show your true colors and stand out. And really, apologize for the dog barking in the background. She's been pretty quiet up until now. But yeah, this is your opportunity to show them the other side of you, the side that's more than just a number, more than just an essay. It's the real person. So it is a great opportunity to do that.
Fantastic. We'll just go through a few interview tips, and then we'll talk about a couple potential interview questions that you want to be thinking about before taking part in those.
Sure. So tips for interviews is can't emphasize enough how important it is to practice. It's not going to feel natural the first time that you do it. You're going to probably talk fast and you're probably going to fidget and look every which way and not really come across as a confident applicant to the program. So when you're practicing, you want to be specific in your answers. You want to think of illustrations and you want to keep them short. This is not the time to go on and on and on, but practicing those quick responses and anecdotes that you're going to want to highlight in very, in very brief form is crucial to this process. And as I mentioned before, half of the battle in being able to really articulate your why and why you're interested in the particular program that you're looking at the institution that you've selected and has selected you for an interview is that you've done your research. You know why you're there. You know enough about the program to really say in short, powerful phrases why it's the best fit for you and why you're the best fit for it. You want to make sure to articulate that you are passionate about this subject. You demonstrate that in your body language, and you maintain your eye contact, and you work on the cadence of your voice so that it doesn't sound like this, but it sounds animated and happy and powerful and really just can't wait to get here and get to work. And that you're also ready to pursue medicine as a career, because that's really going to be the focus of your conversation. You want to have a mature demeanor. You want to be professionally dressed and conduct yourself accordingly. This is not the place to be rustling around with papers, dealing with chewing gum issues, all of that kind of thing. You need to get that well in hand before you're ever in front of an interview committee, because it's easy to blow something that's a great opportunity for you over something really minor. And I've interviewed a lot of people for jobs over the years in my career as well, and it holds true in that arena. Eye contact is huge. Being able to give a firm handshake, knowing how to conduct yourself, where you're going to place your things, all of this, and to just have practiced all of that several times so that it feels like something you can envision. You envision yourself doing it, and you practice it physically a couple of times so that it feels like, okay, I know how to do this. I'm going to be okay. And you're not worried about like, where am I setting my water? How am I? Oh, I've got this in my right hand and I needed to shake their hand, right? There's little things like this that can trip us up. And as I mentioned before, practice and prepare. You want to have jotted down some notes. You're not trying to memorize the script, because if you try to memorize the script, you're going to be like, oh, wait, what was I going to say there? Because your brain is inevitably not going to remember word for word everything that you wrote out. That's not the point. You want to have like an outline, some bullet points, things that you're going to want to make a point of in your conversation, but to have it flow naturally. And that's where the practice comes in. And then, as I said, you want to really be paying attention to your body language. You're sitting forward in your chair. You're not slouching back in your chair. You're not fidgeting a lot. You're holding your hands, on the table and just maintaining a professional demeanor throughout the interview.
Great. Thank you for those great tips. We'll quickly talk about some questions you will potentially face during an interview, and then we'll put another slide to wrap up before we hop into Q&As.
So the interview questions are pretty standard. Tell me about yourself. So that's just kind of giving like your quick elevator pitch, talking about your strengths and weaknesses. When you talk about weaknesses, you always want to turn it into a strength, make it a positive, talk about what you've learned. Obviously, you want to be able to articulate why you want to be a doctor, why you want to be in this program, why that particular program, as Jennifer mentioned earlier, choose something specific about that program that's unique to it and, not other programs don't offer. And something important is also you definitely want to know about issues in the medical field. Oftentimes you might be asked about ethical questions. So you definitely want to think about those things in advance. And then you might just get some questions about, what was your favorite class and why, or, just questions about who you are as a person, your interests. And, sometimes they just want to get to know you as a person. So they're pretty general. They might have some more specific questions like you see here, but as Jennifer mentioned, the biggest thing is to practice, prepare, do a mock interview, and, write down some answers and some notes so that you have some ideas fresh in your mind, but then just practice so that you're not, going through a script in your head. So, those are pretty much, some of the interview questions that you're going to see, among others, but these are the basics.
Great. And I will plug, we just had 2 different webinars for Inspirit Advantage, which is our a sister program that focuses on med school, both about med school interviews, and that might be a great place to go and get some more information on interviews specifically. You can find those on the Inspira Advantage website, so feel free to hop over there. And we can link that in our follow-up email that will also have the recording of this webinar in it, sent out in a couple of days. All right, let's recap. Let's talk a little bit about some myths with BSMD programs and kind of go over what we covered.
Yep. So some of the myths, not a full exhaustive list, but a few of the myths are, I'm never going to need to take the MCAT. Hooray. Well, you might. It depends on your program. So don't go into this thinking that that's a given. You have to do that research, decide how important that is to you, and choose accordingly. And there's also a myth that it is easier than two separate programs. It's not. It is very, very demanding. You're just kind of knowing at the outset that you are in the slot in life and you are in your lane. It gives students an opportunity to really just dive into and focus on what they're really passionate about without the stress of the application process for medical school. It doesn't mean that the workload is any easier. It might not mean that you're out of the MCAT, but it does mean that you're not having to slog through the MCAS application process, which is very laborious in your senior year of college. Some people think, hey, this is going to save me time, and it might. And that might be a good decision for you, or it might be just okay to take the full 8 years. That's something that you need to weigh carefully. What's going to be gained, what's going to be sacrificed, because there's pros and cons with any decision that we make in life. Nothing is all 100% fantastic. So you're evaluating the trade-offs and the pros and cons of whether you're going to complete in 7 years, if that's an option, or whether you're going to attend for the full 8. And yes, it is definitely true that students can still take a gap year if that's a choice that you make. You're not foregoing that.
Fantastic. Rachel, do you have anything to add here?
No, I think Jennifer pretty much covered it. Yeah, nothing else to add.
All right. Well, Rachel, Jennifer, thank you so much. It's been great having you both. I think we'll now spend about 15 minutes on Q&As. So we'll dive right into those. One question that we got early on is, can we define DO? And I realized we didn't do that early on.
Yeah, I can definitely take that. So DO, it kind of focuses, it has a bit of a different focus. So it focuses on the body as a system. It focuses on preventative care and osteopathic treatment, whereas MD follows an allopathic approach, using, medications to treat illnesses and symptoms. I know that's probably not super helpful because it's a lot of technical terminology. What I'll say is that, you can end up in the exact same place, whether you take the DO route or the MD route. The DOs and MDs do the same residency. They, have the same jobs. The difference is in DOs, you will take a couple of additional courses that will focus like more on a holistic kind of approach to medicine, but you're still learning the same materials that you do. There are some different exams that you'll have to take or that you have the option of taking if you are in a DO program. So, I would say that's something helpful because I know that there's a lot of technical terminology. It can certainly be helpful to look at the specific schools that are DO programs and, look at and kind of compare and contrast how they are different. Again, you are taking the same classes because at the end of the day, both are doctors and you end up in the same place, but it can definitely be helpful if you kind of do a side-by-side. And, in general, DO programs have slightly lower requirements, so they are typically a little less competitive. That said, the entire process is very competitive for both MD and DO programs. So I know that, I don't want to get too far into the nitty gritty because it is a lot of technical terminology, but I think that, it would be very helpful to kind of look at the side by side and what the schools actually say about the programs. But again, you're taking the same classes. DOs just have, they're looking at like the body system in general and taking a couple of extra classes on that. So I hope that answers the question a bit more.
Absolutely. Thank you. So one question we saw a couple times in a few different ways is that when schools tend to look for medical related experiences, especially from high school students, it's pretty hard to find opportunities to interact with patients and have direct contact in that way for 16, 17-year-olds. Are there any other good opportunities that reflect really well on students that are a good fit and allow teenagers to partake?
Yes, there are a number of ways to address that issue, and one that I've seen students do is to look for opportunities abroad where the age requirements are not so stringent, and they may be able to work alongside of physicians in a way that students here in the U.S. would not be able to. I saw time and time again in my college level study abroad programs that students would go in their sophomore or junior year and all of a sudden be doing clinical work abroad with minimal training. So you may find programs that are targeted for high school students. There are a number of program providers and opportunities out there where students can get this kind of experience. There are summer programs in the US that have extensive focus and have really thought through how to present the opportunities to conceive of a research project, learn basic research skills, and all while learning about a particular medical field. And I know when I'm working with my students, I'm looking at them and their unique interests and where they would like to be in the country and where some of these programs exist that might be really good fits for them. So those are two ways that I know of just offhand that would help address that issue.
I'll just add to that. It can definitely be helpful to get involved in some of those summer programs. A lot of undergrad institutions do offer summer programs for students who are interested in that route. It's really helpful when you're there to speak to other students, to speak to the professors, see what you can get involved in. And then I mentioned this earlier very briefly, but I think a really great way to get involved is to, use your connections, use your network. If you have family friends, if you have family members, neighbors, anybody who you know in the medical setting, see if you can shadow them or see if they know somebody who is doing research, and that's a way that you can get involved. But it's really just kind of putting it out there that you're interested in getting involved in that setting. Undergrad institutions and medical schools aren't expecting 17-year-olds to have like a ton of patient contact because they're not trained in the medical setting. So they're really not expecting that. If you can get in contact with, patients, that's great. But again, it's really more so going to be, on the shadowing side, again, because you're not trained in how to handle patients the proper way. But yeah, I think just keeping open communication with people in the field is really the best way to get involved. Speaking to any science professor or science teachers that you may have, seeing if they know of any opportunities, but just keeping an open line of communication so that people know that you're looking and will think of you if they hear of any opportunities to get involved.
Fantastic. So are students able to transfer out of BSMD programs if needed, if it's not a good fit? Are you making a full commitment with deciding to go through with the BSMD program?
I believe there are a few programs that will allow you to consider exiting the path and applying to different medical schools. They're very, very few and far between. Most of them envision a full path where you're starting and finishing in their program.
All right. How many BSMD or BSDO schools should students be applying to? This is kind of a multifaceted question. How many hours of shadowing looks good, or how many hours of community service? Are there any benchmarks for that in GPAs?
So in terms of the number to apply to, I mean, there is no set number. Generally, I advise students, like when they're just going on the regular college process, to apply to, at least 12 to 15 schools. With the BSMD schools, they're all reaches. I generally recommend that you have, for students who are applying the BSMD route, that they have 2 separate school lists. So one school list of just like regular pre-med programs, and then a separate school list of BSMD programs. And, really think about whether or not you actually want to go to those programs. If you're like, I would never want to be in Louisiana, then, you may not want to apply. But if you're like, I don't really care where in the country I am, I'm going to apply to as many as I want until I, with the hopes that I get into one, then that's a personal decision. But there really is no right number. Again, you want to make sure to cover your bases in terms of the like regular programs you're applying to, because BSMDs are so competitive that they're all considered reaches for any student who is applying.
Yeah, and to echo that, I also want to encourage anyone who's thinking about doing an early decision to any of the programs to carefully read the fine print in what you're signing with that. I'm sure you've all heard about the early decision concept, that you're committing to attend a school and withdraw all of your other applications if you're accepted into that school, with the caveat, if you can't afford it, then you're able to withdraw your application or turn down the admission. But with, in particular with Brown's program, where I've worked with a number of students in their PLME program, if you choose to, and this is actually written on Brown's website, if you're choosing to ED to their program in their BSMD track, and you are turned down from the BSMD program, but you might still be ED admitted to Brown, you are obligated to attend Brown. And they say on their website, if you are wanting to compare offers for a number of BSMD programs, you need to apply regular decision. So it's a time to get really nuanced with your college admissions counselor and really parse the language of the programs that you're applying to, so that, I mean, one of my students was almost like, oh, and yes, I want to do that. And one was like, wait, no, I don't want to do that. So you have to know which side of the fence you're landing in these kinds of instances.
And to jump to part 2, because I know that there was kind of a 2-part question. So there's really no set number of hours for shadowing or community service or clinical experiences. It's challenging to get these experiences. So pretty much whatever you can get involved in is great. If you're only able, if you are looking for opportunities and you can only get 3 hours, then, that's what you can get. But if you can get, 3 hours every Sunday, that's great too. So, I think it's more about getting the experience and being able to see that side of medicine to really confirm that that's what you want. But, you don't have to meet like an 100-hour requirement or anything like that. Just, try to get involved and, always keep track of your hours, but there's no, specific number that they're going to be looking for.
Fantastic. Do any of these dual degree programs offer either full ride scholarships or some scholarships?
I believe you can get some sort of money to these programs, and I'm sure there are certain things you can apply to. You definitely have to look into each school more specifically, and we can, certainly provide additional information on that. In general, sometimes with these types of programs, it is more challenging because you're agreeing to this kind of in an early manner. But you can always look into financial aid and things of that nature. But yeah, we can also try to provide additional information on that as well.
When you are in a BSMD program, are there any specific majors that you need to take in college or graduate with your bachelor's degree, or can you choose within a pre-med fields?
So that's going to vary by institution. There are programs like Brown that will give students just free reign to design whatever field of study they're interested in pursuing, as long as they're completing the core requirements that are expected to be ready to enter medical school. And there's other programs like Drexel and others that are really looking for more of a focus in a STEM related field. So again, here it's, we're not comparing apples to apples or even fruit to fruit sometimes. You've got to really get to know the institution very well to see what's going to be on offer. And with the scholarship question, just thinking back to that a minute, of course there's going to be financial aid consideration for the undergraduate portion of these programs, and sometimes merit aid that is awarded in as well, depending on the school's approach. And that's a great question to ask in the process of choosing a BSMD program. They don't all offer it. If you think about it, when you're that oversubscribed in terms of applicants, it's not the first place you're going to allocate money in terms of merit scholarships, but it's definitely a good thing to ask about.
Great. Is it required to take AP or highly rigorous classes to be accepted in BSMD programs?
In general, schools will want to see that you have a more rigorous course load. They don't say we require you to take 10 AP classes, but they want to see, these are really competitive programs. The people who are applying are going to have taken many AP courses, particularly AP science courses. So that is a way to help yourself stand out as an applicant by taking these courses. AP courses will also increase your GPA because they're generally weighted heavier than regular courses or honors courses. So while you don't want to overload so much that you end up doing poorly in a class, you certainly want to try to incorporate a good number of APs into your schedule when you're in high school.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have time for one or two more questions. If you are, say, a sophomore in high school or early in high school, what are some things that you should be doing in preparation for applying to a BSMD program, if that's what you're aiming for?
I mean, I think we pretty much touched on a bunch of them. Get involved in volunteering, shadowing, anything you can as early as possible. If your school offers, health science courses or, other medical related courses, try to do that. You definitely want to take a bunch of science courses, particularly AP sciences, because, you'll need to take those again, once you're in the program. So you definitely want to have that foundation. It's also helpful, both Jennifer and I mentioned it briefly during the presentation, but they do have summer courses where you can take science classes, or they're designed for pre-med students. So, looking into those summer courses, it's also a great way to kind of, get the college experience a little bit before you're actually in college. So, just kind of boosting your resume in those ways and really exploring the field as much as possible is the best way you can prepare. And then obviously, focusing on your academics and making sure to have varied extracurriculars also outside of the sciences, whether it's music or art or sports. It's also, it's great to have, be a well-rounded applicant.
All right, I think that's all we have time for. I want to thank everyone who joined us today. It was great to be able to speak with you all and answer these amazing questions. Rachel, Jennifer, we truly appreciate you being able to be a part of this. I know I learned a lot. I'm sure other people did as well. We'll send out an email in a couple of days that has a recording of this webinar. And if there's any questions that you have after this webinar, feel free to send contact@quadeducationgroup.com a question. Feel free to sign up for a consultation on our website. and you can inquire about more information. We're excited to continue talking to you. I hope everyone has a great night.